Welcome back to the A&Q series. Today we're talking about prayer. We've seen your comments and questions about this topic, and we're going to dive deeper into prayer. More specifically, we want to answer some questions about what's called the Lord's Prayer. Now, have you heard of that prayer before? You might have heard of it as the Our Father. Maybe you grew up in a church tradition where you had to memorize this prayer, but you never really learned the meaning of it. So where did this prayer even come from, and why is it so well known? And I would even say, why does it matter to us today? In the Gospel of Matthew, right in the heart of Jesus' most well-known recorded sermon, we call it the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus stops and teaches us, you and me, how to pray. Now, Dallas Willard wrote some very important things about the Sermon on the Mount and prayer in particular, and he gives us, I think, just this really beautiful, simple way to think about prayer. He says that prayer is talking with God about what we are doing together. So this is a conversation between me and God. Now, with that in mind, let's pay attention to the direction Jesus is giving us about prayer. I mean, if Jesus is going to give us advice on praying, we should listen, don't you think? So what's interesting to me is that before he even begins to teach them about this prayer itself, he begins to tell his disciples what not to do. In fact, he's sort of blunt if you go back there and read those passages. He's saying things, essentially, he's saying don't be a fake, don't be a hypocrite, don't try to sound perfect or polished or do this so that other people can hear you. Just come to God honestly because he loves you. And interestingly enough, that's where the prayer begins. Our Father in heaven. Our Father. Now, those who turn to God begin to discover that the King of the universe wants us to approach him the way a trusting child approaches a loving father. And so we pray, Our Father. Now, let me just stop and say that I know how terribly difficult that term can be for someone who's been hurt by a father. And I want you to notice that I said you'll begin to discover this truth. I believe God heals, and for some of us, it's going to be, I think, important to keep talking to someone about where we're stuck. But at its best and purest, that name Father can still mean something. Jesus actually uses the Aramaic word there that some of us are familiar with, Abba, which is so intimate, so personal, it means dad, or you could even say daddy. He is reminding us to come to God authentically and without hiding. He's safe, he's loving, he's trusting. He is a father who longs to hear from his kids. When I lose track of that, when I lose track of how much God actually loves me, that's when, I'm just talking about me, that's when my prayers start to dry up. This God who loves me is ruler over all. So we pray, Our Father in heaven. Hallowed or holy be your name. This is bringing him honor. There is no one like you. And then we ask him to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. God, bring your peace, your justice, your love, your kindness to this world. We are longing for you to make things right. And by the way, we don't just pray these words, we are to live them out, like right now, loving and giving and restoring the way Jesus did. And then we pray, Father, sustain us, give us our daily bread. See, we acknowledge that God has given us our lives, the very breath we have in our lungs, our food, so much more. So what we're praying is, God, please sustain me on this day. And when tomorrow comes, I will trust you again. Forgive us our debts. We ask God to forgive us those wrongs that we have done. Now, we could spend all day on the grace of our loving God who wants to make things right. But then that forgiveness, it turns outward. Forgive those who trespass against us. See, if God can forgive us, then it is possible for us to forgive others. I'm not saying it's easy. I am saying it is freeing. And I'm absolutely telling you it's the way of Jesus. And here's this last part. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. This is a warning not to get trapped in repeated patterns that keep us stuck committing the same sins over and over and over. Jesus invites us to pray to God to release us from those temptations. When we pray, we proclaim that it's God's power, it's God's kingdom, it's God's glory forever. See, we want Him to be in charge, to bring heaven to earth. If you're wanting to try something, I would encourage you to pray this prayer daily for a week or so. Now, not as an empty ritual, but as a personal moment. Perhaps even take it a phrase at a time and allow the meaning of those words to sink in so deeply that it really becomes your prayer. I will just tell you, earlier today, I noticed something in here that is exactly what I need for what I'm facing today. This is how it will work. Now, there will be other prayers that you pray that are more unique to you. It's what you and God are doing together. But I say pray both kinds of those prayers because they are so, so helpful to us. And with God's help and Jesus' words, watch how your prayers come to life. Now, if this video has kicked up more questions for you, we'd love to talk about them. I know forgiveness is a big one, for instance. What else do you want to talk about? So as always, click, subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going. See you next time.